A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Mathew chapter 13 verses 31 to 35. Passage taken from the Message version of the Bible. Another story. God's kingdom is like a pine nut that a farmer plants. It is quite small as seeds go, but in the course of years it grows into a huge pine tree and eagles build nests in it. Another story. God's kingdom is like yeast that a woman works into the dough for dozens of loaves of barley bread and waits while the dough rises. All Jesus did that day was tell stories, a long storytelling afternoon. His storytelling fulfilled the prophecy. I will open my mouth and tell stories. I will bring out into the open things hidden since the world's first day. The Gospel of the Lord. Reflections on the Gospel according to Mathew chapter 13 verses 31 to 35. Yesterday the church observed the day of prayer for grandparents and elderly. Saint Joachim and St. Anne, grandparents of Jesus, were venerated as the patron saints of the grandparents. And today, the church celebrates the memoria of Saint Joachim and St. Anne. The story of Joachim and Anne do not appear in the Bible, but in a book called the Protoevangelium of St. James, completed around the year 170. It gives insight into the life of Mary, mother of Jesus, and her parents. Today, let us continue to pray for our grandparents and the elderly. The parable of the mustard seed reflected the irrepressible hope of Jesus in the future despite an unpromising present. Evangelist Mathew wants to remind his community that although the present state of the community might be unimpressive, like a tiny little grain, its future would be wonderful. The story sounds a bit strange because Jesus speaks of the mustard plant that grows into a tree so that the birds of the sky would dwell in its branches. It is indeed strange to find such a huge mustard plant. The birds of the sky in the Bible referred to the pagans. Now Jesus is making a promise of an apparent impossibility, that the people of the pagan lands would come to this great tree of faith and will find their refuge in it. The second parable about 3 measures of flour is equivalent to 15 liters. It was clearly an extravagant amount. It would have made enough bread to feed more than 100 hungry people. The phrase 3 measures of flour has an exact reference in the Old Testament. When Abraham was visited by his 3 visitors, Abraham instructed his wife Sarah to mix 3 measures of flour along with a whole calf to feed his 3 visitors. The 3 visitors foretold again an apparent impossibility, that Sarah would soon be pregnant and they will have their child Isaac. The image of 3 measures clearly spoke of 2 important messages. First, there is nothing impossible for God. He calls the insignificant and chooses the improbable circumstances to establish His kingdom and His church. Second, He showers His blessings without measures. John speaks of miracles of abundance. 6 jars of wine to a family where they were celebrating a marriage. 12 baskets of bread left over after feeding over 5,000 people. And a super catch of fish by the disciples who toiled without catching any all night. And here, the 3 measures of flour for baking. Ours is a God who gives His blessings in abundance and in extravagance.